Don't ask why I chose that song, by the way. So I love fantasy. In fact, I guess you could say, to a degree, I got addicted to it because when I joined the Air Force, I did not realize how stressful it was going to be. And don't get me wrong, I've had an amazing career. I've met lots of people, but the amount of stress that I had being an air traffic controller and a maintainer just was in like unfathomable for what I had been dealing with in high school. And on top of having this full time job, making sure that I didn't kill anyone in the air, I was also married to somebody that is sitting in this audience and hopefully will not kill me after the show. But I digress. So during all this stress, everyone has their own decompression, and I had found my decompression in D&D. And for those of you who don't know what D&D is, that is Dungeons and Dragons. It's basically where you and a bunch of your friends and or strangers you can find on Craigslist sit around a table, throwing dice down and creating their own little fantasy story, taking a little bit of control into your own hands. And in this world that you can create, you can be the strongest barbarian in the world, capable of bringing down a rhino or being a mage to cast a spell to set anything on fire that happens to catch your fancy. And I loved this idea of just taking control of my life. And that's why I ended up becoming a DM, the guy who makes the world, who makes the stories. And during all this stressful time, when I would come from work, I would sit down at my computer and I would start typing away. I would start building towns, cities, empires, and I would always plan out these beautiful, elaborate situations. But what I didn't realize is while I was engrossing myself in this fantasy world that I was building for other people to play in, that there was two set of eyes staring in the back of my head, and that was my wife. And eventually, when I had engrossed myself too much, I would hear a voice. Hey, are you almost done? Dinner's ready. You want to come over here and enjoy, a dinner with me? You haven't said anything to me since you came home. And of course, at that time, I would take the hint and I would leave that behind to go enjoy a meal. And when I got done, I would say my sweet things and then go back into the world and prepare for Saturday. And basically, that's how life continued. And every Saturday, I would start with 8 hour games. Me and a bunch of guys would sit down and we'd go for 8 hours straight. And basically, we'd have a great time. All the stresses were gone. I could go back to work for another week and deal with the suck that came with it. But as the days turned into weeks, turned into months, all of a sudden that 8 hour game wasn't really enough. And those little world building sessions became a part time job, spending literally 12 to 20 hours a week world building, just building the sessions for the games. And then that 8 hour game day on Saturday became 2 8 hour games. And then eventually I added a game on Sunday that ran for 12 hours. So needless to say, you can see how much time I'm dedicating to this thing. And the whole time I have this wife at the house that is going to school to be an RN, that's basically taking care of the house, making me food, and she is doing her best to, hey, come hang out with me. And I just kind of wouldn't get it. And eventually it came to the point where I would come home just so stressful, like just so stressed from work, I wouldn't even say hi to her anymore. I would just go straight to the computer. And that was my day. I'd come home, do that, go to bed. It was almost like we were roommates at a time rather than a husband and wife. And we would always have these conversations like, hey, you're spending too much time on the computer. Hey, come hang out with me. Let's go for a walk. Let's talk. But I was too fixated on escaping the world that had caused me so much stress into a world where people needed me. this wasn't a hobby where, you could just like, oh, I'm not going to make it today, guys. Have fun. Because now I was important. Somebody needed me to be there to help relieve their stress. Somebody needed me to give them a little bit of control in their own lives. And so a year at this point had passed when one day I hear the same little voice with the same eyes beaming in the back of my head saying, we need to talk. And I don't need to tell anybody that when a woman says, we need to talk, it's not a good time. It's never good. Never has those words been uttered and it been something good. So I mentally prepare myself. I put down my headphones and I go sit down with her. And she says, look, I have been patient with you. I've asked you so many times, put down the game. Just spend some time with me. Just be my husband. Just make me feel important. And I didn't really have anything to say because I knew this was coming. Like this wasn't a surprise to me because I noticed all the months that she had been asking for this very simple thing, just 30 minutes, maybe an hour out of each day that I couldn't afford her. And she basically laid down this line. It's either me or the game. And it wasn't a contest of, oh, I need to pick which one. The choice was really easy, honestly. I chose my wife. I gave up all the games. I gave up my fantasy world. I gave up my escape because at the end of the day, I knew that even though this was my stress reliever, I had an obligation to her. I made her a promise at the altar I would be there for her, and I had been failing that. And I knew in the long run, she was going to be there longer than that game was. So, told all the guys, hey, I'm done. It was hard, but life went on. Jobs changed. Stress continued to mount. And even though I had this amazing wife, I still felt empty. I'm a creative person by nature, and kind of leaving all of that behind, all that time, all that effort. I just didn't have a substitute until one November. I had heard of a challenge called NaNoWriMo, which is National Writers Month. And I was like, man, this sounds like a fun challenge. And I told myself, I'm going to write a book. And at that point, I promised myself I was going to write a book, and I don't make a liar out of myself. And the perfect subject was taking that D&D content that I'd spent over a decade at that point building and running, and being able to just transform and take that into a different medium so I could share those experiences, everything that I had worked so hard for, to the entire world. I was able to take that addiction where I couldn't spend any time with my wife into a new addiction that I could put even more time into, but with a caveat, I could do it sitting next to her. We could go out to coffee shops while she worked at her schoolwork. I could be there typing my stuff away. And I got my stress reliever back in a different form that worked with my lifestyle. And that is how fantasy almost ruined my life, but also became a new chapter in my life. Thank you.